Now, for those that haven't gotten the hint, I really like Kamen Rider OOO. In my opinion, just like Double, it's a good show that only suffers from the idiosyncrasies of Yasuko Kobayashi's work and her apparent, as I keep hearing this secondhand, contempt for the core ideology that exists in the Kamen Rider franchise. In Oza's case, actually finally exploring a valid avenue of critique with it, as opposed to the prior ones in how being a self-sacrificial hero can end up destroying oneself if they have nothing else to live for. That all being part of Eiji Hino's character arc of getting over the trauma of being left helpless in a war zone. Though probably when I watch it for review, I will come up with more critiques. But if that's so, then why am I talking about this movie now instead of just glossing over the relevant stuff? Well, Kamen Rider OOO is, sir, not appearing in this film. As I touched on with Ryuki, Yasuko Kobayashi and Toshiki Inoue do not get along. And with what I've learned since doing Ryuki, it's likely because his father, Masaru Igami, was one of the main scribes for the Showa era and responsible for translating Ishinomori's views of heroism onto the TV screen. Thus, Kobayashi's disdain for that period he likely sees as disrespectful to his father's work. Even as much as he can screw up depicting that ideology, as Takumi Inoue in Fai's shows, there's still ultimately a respect for that work. He just puts everyone through narratively unjustified shit to bring it out, which in tandem with his breakdown in writing ability, makes his work more polarizing, and why I tend to dislike his later work. And while OOO was a Kobayashi series, the OOO's part of Movie War Core was done by Inoue, as Kobayashi was, well, busy. She has been ridiculously overworked for years. But because the only thing for OOO's Inoue did was the OOO segment of this movie, he was completely unfamiliar with the series. Meaning several things it alludes to had not happened, were not part of the series, and had even been drafted beyond some series Bible notations. In other words, it's the exact same problem as Ryuki Episode Final. It introduces and spoils elements that were coming in the series, but in a way that contradicts them. And as I've said, this is consistently where Toei fucks up with their crossover films. They get people to write them that had nothing to do with the show they're writing about. But even though it actively contradicts canon, this team-up is mentioned later in Megamax, and Megamax is canon to Fours. In Neo Heisei, you really get a chain of film events that tie directly back into the series that makes it difficult to actively exclude most of them, which is why the Tyson films are all the more irritating. However, there is a way to make this work, but it requires leaps in logic you should not need. Because of the end of Double time skip before Philip returns to Shotaro, and by his presence in the film, it means it's set between 6 and 12 months after Philip died. But OOO's had its storyline start before the events of Double Forever, due to his early bird cameo being canon to Double, OOO's, and Megamax, thus Fours. Now on one hand, this should be the nail in the coffin since this film released 4 months after Double's ending. On the other, it is in fact possible to set this film as occurring over time in the background of OOO's greater story, and if you do, then most of it actually adds up. As this movie features a series of time skips in its OOO's portion of the film, all of which are not ones that could be compressed down to, say, a month. It has to be far longer than that. And thus, the events of this film could start early in OOO's timeline, but culminate and conclude late in it. Like, say, syncing up with the early 40s where there's a blatant continuity error about the series-long medal count that is in fact not a continuity error and accounted for by OOO's feature film, OOO's Wonderful. Which also ends up having questionable canonicity as well, so this is not a perfect theory by far. But if you do that, most, though not all, of the continuity problems go away. It's a year after Philip died, so Double's timeline checks out. Eiji would have gear introduced in the series after this, and it's when the dinosaur greed and the medals Eiji uses were possibly in his possession. However, there is no notation of time skipping, so this is admittedly all anecdotal. But it is far from the first time Toshiki Inoue has utilized time skipping in his works without notifying the audience of that occurring. And once more, why I compare him to comic writer Frank Miller in Inoue's Collapse of Talent. As sometimes with his stuff, you can't help but respond with, "What time is it?" But unfortunately, due to the characterization being completely wrong, any way you try to rationalize it Oza's part of this is a square peg trying to fit into a round hole. Why do I keep doing that? The double side of it, however, is taken to be fully canon, as not only is it something followed up on in events past this, it provides significant lore expansion to Sokichi Narumi and Shroud, details we'd been wanting on them for some time, many of which I've mentioned already as well, and was one of the few remaining loose ends not explored in the series, meaning despite the contradictions brought from Oza's half and the utter nonsense of the actual team-up, this is the side of things that cannot be ignored. So with this and the errors, you kinda have to take a mulligan since things past this count it, even if it doesn't fit correctly. At the very least, it's not offensive. As this is the director's cut of the film that I'm using, we open on Oza's portion of the film. And by doing so, ruins the absolute best joke in the movie. As originally, Double's half was played first, and it gave us... And originally, they timed that brick joke perfectly. Thanks for undermining your own work, Ryuta Tasaki. Anyways, Cake Boss Kosuke Kogami oversees an experiment conducted by his mad doctor Kyoto Maki to create a homunculus out of cell metals, coins created and containing the power of desire, using them on the grave-robbed corpse of Nobunaga Oda. This will only end in onis. Lots and lots of onis.
Nobunaga.
But upon revival, Nobunaga's scared off by Shintaro Goto, which leads us back to Eiji Hino at a wedding? That better be either Hina or Ankh under there. Actually, he's on a movie set, as a part-time job. Among several others Eiji has in this film, all so he can hand out money to lazy bums who mooch off of him. Yeah, this is why I say Inoue didn't get this series. This is not Eiji. While yes, Eiji is someone who helps others at the cost of himself and doesn't care much about money, as he's basically a traveling hermit, the thing is he does it for people who need help. Not those who say it but are only taking advantage of him. To hand the reward of that effort to those who didn't do a thing to earn it is not something he does. Hell, he regularly outsmarts those in the series who were greedy master manipulators and was shown to be able to distinguish need from want quite easily. You know, as much as I hate Toei's standard hero archetype of the insufferable idiot asshole protagonist, I dislike it just as much when those driven by compassion and trauma are treated as gullible, oblivious, and brain-dead. Stop that! Both of them! Regardless, on another of these jobs, Eiji comes across an armored kaijin creating victims. Eiji fights it, pulling medals from the medal holder actually introduced in the episodes after this, that usually Ankh hangs on to exclusively. His varied 100+ changes allow him greater versatility than any other rider, and the ones he uses managing to scare off the monster, only to run into the escaped Nobunaga. He takes him home to the restaurant Couscous and feeds him alongside Oza's female lead and Eiji's love interest, well, one of them, Hina Izumi, the pair trying to get his name.
Oda Nobunaga? Masaka ne.
Yes, because clearly no one ever since Nobunaga Oda was born has been given that name. Thus, you should automatically assume he thinks he's the historical figure. Eiji tries to help Nobu, which the movie spends most of the time calling him, recover his identity, directing him to the police and things, then time-skipping to Eiji on another job, where Nobu finds him again. The pair beginning to work together on odd jobs, while in the interim, Nobu utilizes the library to absorb as much information as he can about the modern world. Memories beginning to stir within him and harken back to his desire of conquest, just adapting that desire to the modern era. It's just, the way he absorbs information and then churns it out is just absolutely ridiculous. As he then, while working a delivery job with Eiji, jumps on a PC in an office they visit at a convenient time, when a company conveniently has learned they have had an irreparable system bug in their software, which they could not release with that bug, lest they give birth to bugsters. And yet that stops no actual video game or software company who just freaking patch it on day one. And thanks to reading books in a public library that have to be years old at best, Nobu conveniently knows how to fix this specified bug in completely new software he has no experience with, conveniently fixing it for them, and that netting him a convenient, high-paying job out of it. Do I even need to explain how dumb and contrived that entire series of events was? Screw the continuity errors, this is what's really wrong with this movie! Nobu in his monster form kills another victim, Ankh, an allied homunculus called a Greed, wearing the body of Hina's brother Shingo as he's the only thing keeping him alive, seeing this occurrence and sensing the metals within him. The company Nobu got work for then has a dance audition, I presume as part of the marketing campaign for whatever their product is, so as to get Hina's suddenly existing friend Yoshino involved in things because presumably sexy ladies and it's Inoue. Definitely because it's Inoue. Nobu's entranced by Yoshino all of a sudden, being kind to her and usurping the actual company head's control over the audition, because he has earned enough money to buy the company outright. And yet he would probably make a better one than Donald Trump. Also, that is not how any of those things work. Still, this is why this film works better if it's set over an extended period. Him accumulating millions to buy these guys out in a month or less? That's preposterous. 6 months? Still insane, but playing the stock market can net people big if they know how to play it. Hell, this being after a time skip would explain why Eiji has seemed to forget about the armored monsters he just fought earlier if it was actually months ago. As Ankh now brings this to his attention with a copy of the sigil Nobu's been leaving at the scene. Yeah, this error is pretty damn common. I don't blame TV Nihon overtime for not knowing it, but Sengoku does not translate as civil war, warring states, or just warring. Those are all things the period is alternatively referred to as in the West, but they're not synonymous or proper term substitution, as the word does not translate. Sengoku is the actual proper name of that era. As a term, it's descriptive of a feudal conflict which leads to national unification. That's its actual definition. The word itself originates from China and reflected a similar period that came before the unification of China that the Japanese then co-opted to label the era as it ended. I only bring this up as Japan's had several civil wars and warring states periods, so you can't exactly distinguish between them with that Western label. And this just got silly when the franchise got to Gaim. Though that's actually why I now know this. But as these murders are mentioned... No one talks like that! And yes, that's what they're actually saying to each other. The dialogue is that ridiculously stilted to force out exposition. Serial killers, sociopaths, copycats attempting to disguise their crimes, yakuza and other gang activity, terrorists, government assassins, spy units, cultists, or, more likely, monsters that come from the period which you have already fought. Kinda got Knock'em's razor thing going. Nobu proceeds to buy up and buy back things he coveted in life, bringing him into brief conflict with Kogami over the auction for a tea ceremony set, Kogami respecting the strength of his ambition and rewarding him for it. You'll have to fight Gilgamesh over it. Still, the gift is simply to see how far Nobu can go, before his homunculus body collapses on itself. Eiji's shown now having a cleaning service job, coming across Nobu's apartment, allowing the latter man to gush over his acquisitions and insult him by proxy.
面白みのないくだらん人間だ。
あれが神林さんの考える正義ですか？あれがやりたかったことなんですか？夢がなくなったら人間はどうなるんだろう。いっぱい失敗してます。人が人を助けていいのは自分の手が直接届くところまでなんじゃないかって。こんぐらい。まあ届かないことはありますけど、欲望だとしてもこんぐらいなら手に負えますしね。お前なんか欲しいと思ったことあんのか。欲しかったはずなのに諦めて蓋して、目の前のことだけを、どんなに遠くても届く俺の腕、力、おお、叶ってた。お前からもらってたんだ。ありがとう。
It's at this point that Pteranodon Yami, a monster of the week from O's, appears seeking knowledge and power, with Nobu engaging it with Kogami's gift. A birth driver. This is one of the bigger continuity points in the movie. At the time in the series, birth had just been introduced in the possession of Akira Date, and there's only 2 of them. Akira's, which is later passed to cast member Shintaro Goto, and the prototype introduced late in the series that Akira then uses. A potential answer to where Nobu's came from is, this could be the prototype. He only uses birth claws that Protobirth has access to, and the only visual difference is some red rings that are more an aesthetic detail one could think was added in later in programming to distinguish the gears. Regardless, in fighting Pteranodon, Yoshino's caught in the crossfire, which is forgotten, as Nobu uses the incident and press about it for his own glorification. Are you colorblind? But upon seeing her again, it incites him to enter his monster form to exact revenge on her ancestor, only to stop as he sees images of a woman from his past.
決めたぞ。たった今からお前は俺のもの。俺の鳴らし場となれ。
This requires explanation. Nobu is trying to obtain 3 treasures Nobunaga coveted in his time: the Hatsuhana, Nita, and Narashiba. They are a trio of tea ceremony containers considered to be the finest ever crafted. To acquire all 3 in the Sengoku period was considered the same as conquering Japan itself. Narashiba was the only one that Nobunaga was never able to and cannot obtain, as well as claimed by his underling Hideyoshi Toyotomi after his death, in exchange for his forces getting mercy at the 1587 Battle of Kyushu. It was then destroyed in the Great Meireki Fire in 1657. So yes, Inoue is writing a woman as if she were a thing. I would be surprised if this was not expected of him. See? Also, he thinks those 2 should be reversed in priority, Inoue. This resistance to becoming his prize causes him to attack her, debris falling, and breaking her leg. Again, no one talks like that! However, the dinosaur Greed uses it to create another dinosaur-themed Yummy, interrupting a fight that has broken out between Eiji and Nobu. Yeah, usually when you fight them, you choose to wear purple and white. With the Greed, O's main series antagonists, they muse on the sudden appearance of the Greed that created these yummies, Giru. Who's Giru? No one. He never appears in the series. His villain role and power set end up being usurped by another. And the film works better in hindsight with the later introduced dinosaur Greed elements of O's if you just ignore this specific scene, but add a villain the origins of this specific yummy breed somehow for this to even count as a self-contained story. So I could see that being a narrative stopgap. You should not need to, of course, but it's an amazingly easy exclusion that could have tied to when they'd eventually do that, instead of spoiling this as an enemy we've not seen yet, and would then end up never seeing, as he was never a character in the series. Then again, we've had these kind of moments in unequivocally canon movies, or do I need to even bring up the ghost cameo in Surprise Future? I'm honestly surprised they kept this scene in the director's cut of the film, as this entire sequence is superfluous, only eating time before we see Nobu beginning to collapse, losing all the knowledge he gained before stumbling out, being given a series of empty platitudes by Eiji which in no way reflect his character, or how the moral being showcased with Nobu is how ambition is worthless if you do not live a fulfilling life, and that actually being the contrast between him and Eiji. Eiji is lacking in desire because his ambition is to help people, and that goal is achieved every day. Nobu heals Yoshino with powers he should not have, before being driven mad by Kyoto Maki, shoving into him the black core metals which complete his homunculus form. Where did these black core metals come from? No idea. Best guess is, since Kogami's later shown producing his own original core metals, and with how Foundation X later creates their own greed, is they were his first run prototypes. Yes, I made papercraft versions of the Megamax core metals. Not like Bandai ever released any of them. Eiji stops him by beating him to death with his Sagozo combo, after Ankh tells him that all Nobu ever was reanimated dead flesh. Though how Ankh knows that is anyone's guess, considering he is currently possessing and keeping alive a guy that when he first possessed him was freshly dead. But as things close on this side of the movie, the black core metals are pulled away. Why? Not explained, but chronology-wise, we then need to back up half a day, as this brings us to Double's half of the film. And really, I think that's why Ryuta Tasaki chose to flip the segments in the director's cut, as now the film follows more of a distinguished timeline from beginning to end event, which more supports the "this movie occurs in the background over the span of months" theory of mine. Double encounters that same Pteranodon Yummy from earlier, in its hands, claws, the memory, Ryu helping with solely his sword, as Akiko has confiscated his driver.
Oi, Akiko! 何すんだよ!
こっちのセリフじゃい! 花婿が大事な結婚式をほっぽって何やってんのよ! Oh, and Akiko's character has devolved back to being her beginning of series annoying self.
However, there is a reason for it. Pre-wedding jitters, and the realization that everyone important to her in her life is a Kamen Rider. And on the eve of her marriage to Ryu, she's scared her husband-to-be could end up like her father and Philip, dying pointlessly and leaving her alone with nothing but bitter memories. She already saw what losing Philip did to Shotaro. She's not sure she could endure as he did. And moreover, it's brought back reminders of how she was abandoned by Sokichi all those years ago, today becoming just another broken promise. Pteranodon somehow overhears her and grabs her, triggering the power of the memory to fulfill her desire, and the desire he was created to grant.
Dinosaur Yummy destroy desire, not fulfill it. Also, this is another recurring trend in Sanjo's post-double works, rogue memory still in circulation.
But due to the power of memory, Akiko is allowed to see visions of Sokichi's time, taking her back to 1999 and the first Dopant case.
Which retroactively makes this incident predate Kuga and the emergence of the Grongi with regards to Heisei Rider events. I had to think that a lot of weird crap retroactively went down in 1999 and 2000. Kabuto's meteor crash, the Roidmude rebellion, the birth of the Bugsters, the list goes on.
Which begins with Sokichi and his partner, Matsu, arguing over how to brew coffee.
Villain! He's the villain! There's the likely reason we've never seen nor heard of him before.
He's contacted by Melissa, a friend of his, played by Akiko's actress, who wants Sokichi to act as her bodyguard. And good timing too, as a woman with a bat tattoo enters the performance hall to see a show of spiders.
Because tradition! See, this is why radiation is bad for you.
The police, led by younger Jino, enter and are shown to be completely useless against it. And hey, this was the first Dopon crime, so it's not like they actually knew better. Sokichi rescues Melissa, fighting off Spider himself, and in doing so ignites the lifelong fascination with Narumi's badassness of the in the audience Shotaro Hidori. The Batwoman from earlier, Erin Komori, gloats on the superiority Spider shows to a normal human, for she is a Gaia memory dealer. Spider escapes, but Melissa is shown grasping her arm, affected by Spider, Matsu appearing and asking he drop this case, as the supernatural is beyond Sokichi. But Sokichi's tenants prevent him from doing so. He returns to the office, entering its back room, which is being used by Fumine Shroud Sonozaki. This is not long after she left Ryubi, having come to Sokichi due to the pair being childhood friends, and Shroud is preparing for him resources to combat the coming surge in Dopon's incidents, having already built the Stag phone as a countermeasure since, well, Sokichi's been skeptic about the whole Gaia memory thing. Now, though, Shroud's not having that nonsense, handing him Skull, even though Sokichi still refuses to take the device.
Gotta say, that's pretty foolish for him from what we know of Sokichi.
Matsu is shown to be Sokichi's researcher for cases in the same vein Philip is for Shotaro, utilizing the library to pin together a case profile of how a multitude of talent from Melissa's host agency have all gone MIA. Sokichi visits Isamu, the guy from the Beast case, who at this time was one of Sokichi's informants, telling him of Stone, a small-time criminal who can help him break into the talent agency. Upon entering, he sees that the entire place has been turned into one big test for prototype Gaia memories, the agency's head, Yaguchi, taking advantage of their state, alongside of his benefactor, Aaron.
Because tradition!
She kills Stone, leaving Sokichi fighting for his life, Spider coming to assist that, and together they use technology control to murder Sokichi. And they would have gotten away with it too if it weren't for that meddling Shroud, and her stupid Magnum too! Crystal Skull, yes, I'm saying it that way intentionally, is an incomplete and weaker version of the Skull we've seen before, but is still strong enough to match the small army of masquerades that are suddenly called in. The hell? Don't think these guys should be used as a mock enemy yet. Still, they distract him long enough for Spider to pin him with construction equipment.
Now is not a good time, Akiko!
See, this is her birthday, and he's absentee. Sokichi telling her what's happening that, while vague, is hilarious in how literal it is.
I'm so glad you grew out of that.
And this is where he made that promise to her, to be there on her wedding day. The watching Akiko, realizing his duty and destiny as a rider, predated that promise, even as it gives him the resolve to fight.
Spider-Man called! He wants his heroic spirit bits back.
Sokichi chases the escaping Bat and Spider, finding Yaguchi with his wife as he accuses him of being Spider, only for a spider on her arm to leap off and explode. Well, so much for that suspect. Spider taunts him with a message written in webbing, but that taunt gives him entirely away. Akiko's pulled out of the flashback by Ryu dragging her physical form away from Pteranodon, only to pull away from Ryu in turn and prevent Double from using a maximum drive to kill it, desperate to see how her father's tale ends, and re-triggering the memory.
Which, considering the pace of things, is a very unwelcome diversion since it cuts away just to cut straight back to the action.
All it adds is Shotaro lamenting, once again, his failure in the Begins Night incident that led to Sokichi's death, which has already been addressed in detail. Back in the flashback, Sokichi finds Melissa and declares he'll stop Spider, only for Melissa to tell him to just forget all of this. But he can't. No matter what, he'll follow a case through to its end. Shroud adding the additional factor of these first production memories lacking the safety features of later ones, meaning ejecting or breaking the memory will kill its user.
As I said way back with the Beast case, odds are this was a quickly amended aspect of the devices. After all, hard to get test subjects using them if awareness of them eventually being lethal is allowed to circulate.
Thus, Sokichi goes to Matsu. How? He writes his ones with a flare. Melissa once more intercedes to try and stop them, revealing Matsu used the memory because he learned what Yaguchi was doing and wanted to stop it. Stand up, as Sokichi was known to.
And he chose to take the easy way out, to grasp power with his own hands, and was consumed by that power as a result.
And he has infected Melissa with one of his spiders. He gave it to her back at the theater, thinking she loved Sokichi and not him, and it's true. She doesn't love Matsu, as touching him doesn't blow him up, and he hates them for that. Matsu forces them outside, spraying his spiders into the sky out of spite, infecting dozens of people, including Sokichi. Thus beginning the death toll caused by the dopamine crimes in Futo. Matsu flees, Sokichi making a chase, only to be blocked by Eren.
松井さんはガイアメモリ購入者第1号として実にセンセーショナルな活躍をしてくれ。これでみんな欲しがるでありんしょう。この魔性の小箱。
All because Sokichi chose not to take the power Shroud offered. Because he hesitated using it to defend others with it, all out of pride. And inside, it kills a piece of Sokichi's soul. And thus, from that realization, the true avatar of death is born. Skull kicks Bat's ass, it using its tech control to use a tanker as a weapon, only for that to backfire as Shroud sends the precursor to the Revolgary, the Skullgary, to support him.
Though what the hell the use that thing is questionable. I mean, the Revolgary carried support components to reconfigure the hard-boiled her. This is just a giant dragster. Admittedly, Philip likely remodeled this into that, but it seems like a waste in that form.
Still, have fun with a Mad Max-inspired scene, which leads to the bat being broken. But a memory break isn't the end the Bat Dopon experiences. Instead, Sokichi goes full-on Rorschach.
Cool guys don't look at explosions. They blow things up and then walk away.
Thus, a dead man walks into a spider's lair to save the spider's prey.
一つ、俺はいつもそばにいる仲間の心の闇を知らなかった。二つ、戦う決断が一瞬鈍った。三つ、そのせいで町を泣かせた。
何を言ってやがる。
俺は自分の罪を数えたぜ。さあ、お前の罪を数えろ。
His chest manifests a skull, ending Matsu. But not breaking his power's hold on anyone. Both Melissa and Sokichi still bear the spider's mark. But here's the irony of all of this. Melissa did love Matsu, but the bomb didn't go off because Matsu was its creator. He was just too consumed by his own hate and jealousy to see that. But Akiko's not allowed to see how that all concludes because the memory has gotten what it needed.
What did it need exactly?
Which is where the black core metals come back into play, fusing the two sets of powers into one entity.
Who talks like that?
Eiji comes in and saves Akiko from Core. The two rider factions recognize each other from the events of Double Forever, and is actually the one to get through to Akiko on her anti-rider stance. As though their duty may bring pain and hardship, she just saw through those visions the result of what happens when one refuses to stand up and help people.
Unless, you're Shinji Kido, where it's his involvement that makes a mess of everything.
And thus we dive into the team-up battle. Let's... And they are not in any way equipped at fighting a giant CGI burning Kamen Rider kaiju. Philip out of nowhere, determining Core is drawing power from the Earth.
And no, they never, ever explain what the hell Core's deal is. He just appears from the power of the memory and the black core metals interacting. No prompting, it's just there as a final boss battle. Every other movie war to date more justifies its final enemy.
The pair get their rider machines in flight configurations, even though the Toride vendor cannot in any form fly, and dive into the hole the memory made, Core following after them, but being blocked by structures in the drilled hole, which eventually lets out into a cavern with a glowing crystalline structure.
I presume, since this is under Futo, that this crystal is an access point to the true Gaia memory, which set off everything for the dopant mess in the first place. Otherwise, once again, not explained. I love these shows so damn much.
The pair slash the crystal to shards, which cut Core's power, leaving them in better shape, but still at a disadvantage, as it still knows everything about all Kamen Riders, intending to attack, defeat, and outdo them all.
Things related to Double keep doing that.
But on the surface, Pteranodon proceeds to chase after Ryu and Akiko because Ryu's driver falling free of Akiko's possession, with Ryu finally retrieving it, and revealing the reason he fights now is her.
Again, fuck Kamen Rider Tyson. It never gets less poignant.
Goto, using the birth driver, again evidence of why I think this film could conclude late in Nose's events, backs Axel up, together the two exterminating the rogue Yummy. As down below, to keep Eiji from dying, Ankh reveals he's got spare core metals, leading to the debut of my favorite Kamen Rider form before it actually show up in the series. It kicks up a storm of wind, supercharging Double to Gold Extreme, and together the two riders kick Core to undeath. I don't think he can kill was never alive to begin with. And with that, Akiko's outgrown her rider phobia, and the lot racing back to the wedding, while Eiji has somehow ended up in Rio de Janeiro.
What? What? This makes no sense! They were under Futo, not at the Earth's core, and it isn't hollow to let him get there!
Well, whatever. As Aki prepares to walk down the aisle, who should appear before her but Melissa, delivering Sokichi's final wishes to her, in lieu of the meeting the two would never have, because he could never risk it. The spider bomb remained in him to his dying day. For the one Sokichi loved more than anyone else in life, the lament and skull he's endured all these years, the kindness and sadness hidden by his hat, is... And thus, while only there in spirit, once more Shokichi is there to fulfill his promise, concluding the film by walking her down the aisle.
Movie War Core ultimately is a dumb movie, mostly held up by Double's half and things once again.
I feel that if the O's side respected that show more, this would be counted among the good ones, but the distaff elements from its continuity and outright disdain for Eiji as a character are the things that drag this one down, coupled with the director's cut only hindering the film with its restructuring, and the final act with the just plain random appearance of Core significantly detracting from things, with how it all comes out of nowhere, nor do the actions needed to defeat it make any goddamn sense. Megamax and Full Throttle, which both use the story devices of an enemy of both relevant factions uniting into the final foe, pulled this off a lot better than here. Akiko learning of her father's history and how deeply tied into the memory mess, however, is really the strength of it, concluding a lingering arc with regards to how she reacted to learning of her father's death, and his prior role as the city's protector, and why he, unintentionally as it was, abandoned her, finally receiving closure with these revelations of how his absence in her life was out of love. Ultimately, of the bad movie war films, this one to me is the least bad, as the idea of the Nobunaga story linked to the desire theme in O's is not a bad idea, but the execution was sorely lacking, and you can see how they really hadn't settled into much of the idea of how to do the movie war format yet, with this just being the second movie of that event series.
Which would be more clarified in Megamax. Still, it's worth a watch more for the double segments, again, and then the team-up if you want to just ignore the Nobunaga stuff, as the flashback with Sokichi and the closure it provides is still good stuff, and actually, in a way, sets up the final double content I have to cover. Double returns Kamen Rider Axel and Kamen Rider Eternal. We are not in for a good time.